Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair, Commissioners of the Planning Board. My name is Harriet Quinn, and I'm here on behalf of the Woodmore Pinecrest Citizens Association, which is a neighborhood of about 1,160 homes that's located directly across from University Boulevard from the site. I appreciate you accepting our comments a little late, and we had a little technical difficulties yesterday because of the file sizes, so I appreciate your indulgence. This tower of 199 feet on the property at 111 University Boulevard East is owned by the Silver Spring Volunteer Fire Department. The tower would be owned by Montgomery County and would include 7 antennas for the public safety radio system. We absolutely appreciate and value the service of our volunteer and career first responders and have enjoyed a decades-long relationship with the Volunteer Fire Department. And we respect the need for upgrading the current radio network and appreciate the hard work of those who've been working on this project. Unfortunately, this is a residential zone with a very small site of 0.69 acres that is not suitable for a second tower on the same site. That would be 199 feet, and less than 300 feet from residences, the Litza Daycare, the adjacent Blair High School campus, and within 800 feet of St. Bernadette Elementary School. The proposal would be to construct a third tower in this very small area. Of the 3 towers, only one would have gone through the special exception conditional use review process that's required for all new telecommunications towers. It's also noteworthy that new telecommunications towers are no longer allowed in the CR zones. Please note that the latest literature recommends locating, or a recent study recommends locating towers at least 1,600 feet from schools in order to reduce liability to providers. So on the map, you can see the number of schools that are in this area. There are 4 schools and a daycare center less than 1,600 feet from this location, and within 800, the other tower on the other side of the Beltway is within 300 feet of the Blair property. So under the mandatory referral uniform standards, as you know, the Planning Board will consider all relevant land use and planning aspects of the proposal, including but not limited to whether it's consistent with the master plan, which is the 1996 Four Corners Master Plan, and whether the proposal is consistent with the intent and requirements of the zone in which it's located, whether the nature of the proposed site and development, including its size, shape, scale, height, arrangement, and design of structure, is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and properties. And finally, of the other things that you will be considering, whether alternatives or mitigation measures have been considered for the project if the proposal is inconsistent with the master plan, or with the general plan or other plans and policies for the area, or has negative impacts for the surrounding properties. Is it 10 minutes for organization?
Well, we don't do it like that anymore. I'm not going to cut you off. I mean, the good news is I'm not going to cut you off as long as you're not repeating yourself.
Right.
The bad news is you don't get a set amount of time. So
you don't get what?
You don't get a set amount of time. It's not like you get 10 and somebody else gets 3. Say your piece. Try to keep it as succinct as you can. But I try to allow people to get whatever they have to say out there within reason.
Okay, thank you.
So
appreciate
we'll work with you, is what I'm saying.
Right. So while we support, enhancing, obviously, the public safety radio system, this is just not the right site for this, given what's already there, given the residential character of the neighborhood, and given what's in the master plan, which says, and I quote, "All future projects must be carefully integrated into the existing community and designed to enhance the Four Corners image, appearance, sense of place, and pedestrian safety. This site proposal is not carefully integrated, and it does not enhance the Four Corners image, appearance, or sense of place. In fact, it would detract from the image and sense of place by industrializing one of the areas that's the entrance to the community." This is one of the entrances not only to Four Corners, but to our neighborhood in Woodmore. There are numerous pages throughout the master plan, many quotes about revitalizing the area, taking careful planning to integrate the new Blair High School into the architecture of the surrounding community, and I think they did a very good job of that in terms of scale and type of architecture. And then secondly, the proposal is not consistent with the intent and requirements of the zone in which it's located. This is an R60 zone where the height limit is 35 feet. The current building does not even meet building standards for setbacks. And under the current code, it's a non-conforming use. Private rescue squads are no longer permitted use in R60 zone. We're not saying anything against the rescue squad. We're just pointing out the property and what's there. In addition, the current tower that's on the roof of the firehouse, which is leased by AT&T, is also a non-conforming use, as it's a commercial use on the R60 lot that today would require a special exception. However, it was put in place prior to 1996 when the Telecommunications Act was enacted. So it's likely if it was applied for today, it would not be granted. And the proposed additional tower at 199 feet, which is above the height limit for a tower in the R60 zone, would likely not be approved if applying through the conditional use process. It would be a conditional use on a non-conforming property with another non-conforming commercial use on a non-conforming property. A previous application by Sprint for a 170-foot tower in the parking lot of the volunteer fire station was withdrawn because it did not meet the zoning ordinance and was found to be too big for the parcel. We were not involved in that. It didn't even get through the tower committee. So the existing two towers with more than 65 antennas attached will remain. These towers will likely continue to expand as they have over the years, and adding a third tower that would also likely expand with additional antennas in this small compact area is an excessive amount of macro tower facilities with antennas in one place. Having two towers on a 0.69 acre property is not compatible with property zoned R60. It's also not compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and properties. Having a tower of such height of 200 feet and less than 300-foot setback from dwellings is not compatible with the surrounding properties. It's not consistent with the adjacent property at Blair High School, which was carefully planned to integrate with the architecture, as I said. Furthermore, the International Association of Firefighters is opposed to placing towers at fire stations due to the impacts to firefighters. If the international union that represents firefighters does not think it's compatible use at stations, it should not be considered compatible at this station, which is also in close proximity to students. Finally, alternatives were not adequately considered. The staff does not show alternatives despite the negative impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, including residences and schools. The coverage maps show that most of the gaps in coverage are west and south of the proposed site, if I could. So this is the current coverage, and you can see the area that we're talking about, which is covered by the area where the station is covered by the tower there called Berkshire Towers, which is in White Oak, which is 1.5 miles from the Fire Station 16. And there do not appear to be too many gaps there currently, according to that map. And this is the model of all 22 sites, and as you can see, there are significant gaps that would remain in western Silver Spring, White Oak, and the area between on East-West Highway between 16th Street and Connecticut Avenue. So Rosemary Hills, Littonsville, parts of Chevy Chase. So the coverage model should have modeled what coverage would look like using additional alternatives, such as the existing 265-foot tower at Sligo Golf Course, right there on the top, which is owned by the commission. The Whirl Building on George Avenue, and any of the dozens of rooftops in downtown Silver Spring that have roof towers and antennas, including an unmanned Verizon building on George Avenue. Instead, the coverage model only models one site for this area. This area is currently covered by the site in White Oak, as I mentioned. Downtown Silver Spring is lacking in coverage due to the development, and there's also gaps in Kensington. So the proposal obviously doesn't meet any of the standards if it were a conditional use. It does not meet the 300-foot setback from dwellings. It's not located in the right-of-way. The height limit of 179 feet for public safety it does not meet that at 199 feet. And among other findings that a hearing examiner would have to find is that the use will not, when evaluated in conjunction with existing and approved conditional uses in any neighboring residential detached zone, would not increase the number, intensity, or scope of conditional uses sufficiently to affect the area adversely or alter the predominantly residential nature of the area. A conditional use application that substantially conforms with the recommendations of a master plan does not alter the nature of an area. So this proposal for a second tower on this same property increases number and intensity of use and does not substantially conform with the master plan. A finding should also be made that it would not cause undue harm to the neighborhood, that it would not have an effect on the use, peaceful enjoyment, economic value, or development potential of abutting and confronting property owners. The combination of two towers on the same small parcel would have an adverse impact on the economic value and the development potential of confronting property owners. It may also have additional adverse impacts on the health and welfare of neighboring residents, students, and employees. And finally, any structure to be constructed or reconstructed must be compatible with the character of the residential neighborhood. And as I've mentioned, we do not find it compatible with the existing residential character. So in summary, the WPCA requests that the Planning Board recommend disapproval of this application because under the mandatory referral uniform standards, the proposal doesn't comply with the Four Corners Master Plan, is not consistent with the intent and the requirements of the zone in which it's located, and is not compatible with the surrounding neighborhood and properties. Given the negative effects on the surrounding properties in close proximity to so many students, and since it does not substantially conform with the master plan, there should have been an adequate alternatives analysis done, which is a requirement of the mandatory referral review. It's also a requirement for all applicants to maximize co-location opportunities on existing structures. There are no alternatives listed in the staff report. We also therefore ask that the Planning Board request a list of the various existing structures at alternative sites that are in the area and that are not in such close proximity to residences and school children. Attached to our comments are several of the numerous alternatives in the area for co-locating the county's 7 antennas on existing support structures. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I think we have a question.
Ms. Quinn, thank you for your presentation, very thorough presentation. I did have a question for you. I skimmed your report that you've read in detail to us. I wanted to ask you, you're asking the board to reject this this application, but I also noted that you mentioned alternative sites. Are there any alternative sites that you've mentioned that you would suggest instead?
Well, the Sligo Creek Golf Course would, we think by its position, meet coverage even better than what this is proposed to do, because as you see from the coverage maps, it doesn't really solve much in terms of the coverage. So this is the existing, and this is what would be with all 22 towers. The other option, and then all of the rooftop towers in downtown Silver Spring on the World Building, on the Verizon Building, I'm sure there are others, but they do have to meet, they do need certain height requirements for these towers for point-to-point communication between the two towers next to wherever this tower would go. One of the other options we asked them to look at was locating in the abandoned cloverleaf behind the fire station to push it back more, and it would be on state highway property. That cloverleaf would not be reopened even if the Beltway expansion happened, because the design would not include all of that property. And so my understanding from talking with the state was that The state said, yes, you could move it there under the condition that we would own it because it would be on our property. But the county did not want to do that, is my understanding from the head of the program for the state radio public safety system. So that was one other option. We thought that was close, a little further from homes and schools, but still we think that having so many towers in this area is, in such a small, condensed area, is a problem.
Okay. Catherine Katzen.
Hi, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm a parent of 2 future Blair High School students, and I'm also here to request that you recommend the denial of the application for the 199-foot tower that would be adjacent to Blair High School campus. I value the service of our volunteers and first responders and respect the need for an upgrade to the public safety radio system. However, this would be a second tower within 50 feet of the Blair campus and less than 300 feet from homes and a child care center, and the third tower within 200 feet of Blair High School. The proposed third tower, with a height of 199 feet, can have dozens of commercial wireless antennas and other equipment added after the county constructs the tower. This is an issue of equity. There is no other school in Montgomery County with 2 cell towers in such close proximity. A third and oversized tower at this location would be an excessive overconcentration of wireless facilities in a small area where thousands of young people, including childcare and elementary school students, are gathered. This is unjustified and not equitable. Nearly 25,000 studies have documented the adverse health effects of exposure to radio frequency microwave radiation from cell towers, including neurologic effects such as sleep impairments, learning and memory problems, dementia and tinnitus, cardiac and blood pressure effects, endocrine and immune effects, genotoxicity, and cancer. In fact, Montgomery County sued the FCC over the lack of response to the county's request to update the FCC's 1996 standards for RF emissions. In 2018, NIH's National Toxicology Program found an unusual cancer called schwannoma in the hearts of male rats exposed to cell phone radio frequency radiation. Researchers with the renowned Ramazzini Institute in Italy found that lab animals exposed to environmental levels of cell tower radiation developed cancers, including malignant brain, glial tumors, and precancerous conditions, including Schwann cells. Placing a third tower by Blair High School would be replacing the rats that NIH and Ramazzini Institute used with our children as the guinea pigs for this exposure, perhaps unlimited exposure to cell tower radiation. It is also important to remember that children's skulls are softer and thinner and have more fluid content than those of adults. The human brain is still developing into the mid-20s. In 2013, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer detailed research showing the average RF energy deposition is twice as high in certain regions of children's brains and up to 10 times higher in the bone marrow of children's skulls compared to the energy deposition in adult brains and skulls. The radiation is absorbed more deeply into children's brains, and therefore children need greater protections in place. According to a 2018 study, mobile phone base station tower settings adjacent to school buildings impact on students' cognitive health. Schools with nearby cell towers had significant declines in cognitive scores when the radiation from the cell tower was higher, but still at non-thermal levels. The county needs space for only 7 public safety antennas, and there are numerous alternatives for the county to co-locate the 7 public safety antennas on support structures and towers that already exist, or on the tower in Sligo Golf Course. I hope that you will withdraw the application and continue to support the primary mission of MCPS to provide a safe and supportive environment for the academic success of every student.
Thank you. James Williamson.
I am a lifetime resident of Woodmore, and I was on the advisory committee that met every month for 3 long years to write the Four Corners Master Plan. Some may say it is outdated, but it's the last one written and the one we are working under, and it still applies. At no time did anyone envision or want a nearly 200-foot tower for any purpose across from Williamsburg Drive, a major entrance and gateway to the Woodmore neighborhood. Would you want it where you live or next to where your children attend school? It was important to our committee resident members and the capable planning staff to put language in the master plan that nothing ever be done to detract from the residential neighborhoods or the visual appearance of where we live. How does a looming, above all else, 200-foot tower fit into that? It is completely out of scale to everything in the residential and commercial area. There was a meeting with representatives from the Department of Technology, the Fire Department, and community members at Blair High School in April of 2018. That's the same Blair High School with over 3,000 students, and the principal has not been notified of the 200-foot tower. The Blair High School property is right next to the 200-foot tower location. One of the main questions that night was if alternate sites were considered and studied. We were told no, but they will be. In June of 2019, there was a follow-up meeting. Again, the question was asked about the alternate sites, and again, we were told they were not looked at. As I understand it, this location was chosen to fill in a gap in coverage. But also understand there will still be a coverage gap in White Oak and downtown Silver Spring, even with the 200-foot tower at the University Boulevard Fire Station. Why is Montgomery County stuck on this spot? A representative from the fire department came to our monthly Woodmore Association meeting just last week. He said they did not ask for the tower and do not want it, but Montgomery County is pushing it. Pushing it to the point that no one has been notified. Not the Woodmore homeowners, especially the ones that live less than 100 feet across the street, and that includes a daycare. The Blair High School principal was not notified, and neither was the principal at St. Bernard School, located just a few hundred yards away. In Section 2 of your own guidelines, it says you are supposed to send appropriate, adequate, and timely notice to adjacent and abutting property owners. You have fallen woefully short. No notice has been given. The county should not have a lower standard than a commercial enterprise that would require a special exception due to it being less than 300 feet from a residential neighborhood, next to and near 2 schools and across from a daycare. It also does nothing to improve the physical appearance and image of Four Corners, and is most definitely not consistent with the goals and aspirations of those who wrote the master plan. Thank you.
Okay, Susan Kahn.
Hi. As a parent of a student in MCPS and as a volunteer who has worked in schools across the county, I've been alarmed to see cell towers directly beside schools. In 2019, in California, Sprint turned off a cell tower beside Weston Elementary after 4 students and 3 teachers were diagnosed with cancer since 2016. I was stunned not only to see 2 major cell towers with a combination of over 65 antennas close to Blair High School, but to learn of a proposed 3rd cell tower to be placed near the playing fields. While the tower serves the understandable purpose of public safety, I urge you to examine alternative sites that are not so close to schools and homes. Reasons to oppose this application are an alternative location is available, and I specifically think of the Sligo Creek Golf Course that has not been examined. There is an existing very old AM tower there that could easily be replaced. I don't think that that has even been considered. Public input is also needed, and adjacent property owners and stakeholders haven't been contacted. The Board of Education and MCPS have not approved a cell tower on school property since 2009. Too few firefighters also have been informed about the effects of such cell towers so close to fire stations. In California in 2015, a 25-year veteran of fire captain described the neurological damage of firefighters living by cell towers, and the firefighters union successfully opposed the construction of cell towers on fire station property. And someone already mentioned that the International Association of Firefighters opposes the use of fire stations as base stations for cell towers due to the experienced health effects that are detailed on the website that I've given in my testimony. Equity, the placement of it is another reason to not consider this as an ideal location for this important public safety tower. A 3rd tower at Blair seems unfair to students experiencing such a dense concentration of cell towers and RF radiation. While cell towers have no business on schools, any schools, it's disturbing that over 80% of cell towers in MCPS schools are at schools where at least 1/3 of the students are eligible for free and reduced price meals. The county would be placing a third tower near Blair, which is the largest high school in the county with over 3,000 students, and they have a student body that has about a 35% farms rate with about 50% ever farms rate. All students should have a safe place to play and watch sports in green space outdoors, such as in the ball fields beside the fire station, but that's also near the proposed site of the macro tower. Health impact is another reason students and residents would bear the burden of whatever health impacts this macro tower would have. Particularly, I'm thinking about the students, the young people at the daycare across the street, as well as the Blair High School students. And as we know, there's a lot of evidence of the carcinogenic role of RF radiation. While early studies about the cancer-causing role of cigarette smoking and asbestos were discounted, the body of evidence over time substantiated the carcinogenic role. It appears that those in the industry, insurance industry, have known for years about the carcinogenic effects of RF radiation. Lloyd's of London was the last global insurer to exit the RF radiation exposure market in 2015. Other carriers do not insure telecommunications companies from health impacts to people nearby. Finally, I'm concerned about the commercial uses of a tower that would go up at Blair. We know that other towers nearby have eventually put on commercial antennas on the site, and mainly I'm concerned about that because of the lack of oversight that the county has already demonstrated in their not managing effectively incorrectly placed cell towers. There's one at 7800 Brickyard Road since 2011. It was put there without a permit. It has not been removed. We know that affordable housing units, buildings in Tacoma Park, one of those at Park Ritchie in Tacoma Park has 33 cell antennas atop it, and the radiation levels have acknowledged to be 25 times the FCC limit. Nothing is being done about the concentration and the health exposures of the people in these existing buildings. And until we can get to manage that, I'm very concerned about placing a tower on the Blair campus. Finally, I just urge you to consider to care about the students in this area as though they were your own children, and to care about the firefighters as though they were your family members. I have a relative and friends who graduated from Blair, friends whose children attend there, and friends who have children bound for Blair. Blair has an excellent magnet program and an excellent reputation in general. Parents do care about their children's health, and the perception of an unhealthy environment for students will discourage parents from sending students to Blair, will potentially discourage good teachers from teaching there because the workplace cannot be guaranteed to be as safe as others, and will potentially obviously affect property owners in the area because the presence of a cell tower does affect property values. So with 2 towers already in the Blair High School area, there seems little reason to add a third so close to schools and homes, particularly with given the existence of a very preferable location at the Sligo Creek Golf Course or other locations that should be examined. I'll just finally mention Sligo Creek Golf Course is 1 mile farther west, and it's inside the Beltway. It offers better radio coverage to address the critically underserved areas, particularly downtown Silver Spring and east-west highway from 16th Street to Connecticut. So these areas of Silver Spring and Chevy Chase would be better served if this location for this macro tower were about 1 mile west at the Sligo Creek Golf Course. It would still serve the Blair High School area effectively. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Catherine Desmond.
Well, my name is Catherine Desmond, and I've lived in Montgomery County since 1987, and my statement will be brief. I'm here to express my deep concern about the placement of this public safety cell tower just 50 feet or so from where my 16-year-old daughter spends the majority of her waking hours. I speak for her and for her future in asking you to consider other, more prudent locations for this technology, as have already been mentioned. In the 1980s, as a young reporter new to Washington, D.C., covering occupational safety and health, I wrote about the Johns Manville Corporation's decades-long suppression of the known health hazards of asbestos exposure. And the corporation filed bankruptcy in 1982 in order to pay the enormous health claims and lawsuits of workers with asbestosis and malignant mesothelioma, claims that continue to this day. In that story, the experts knew early on that asbestos was hazardous to health, and history proved them right. Please don't let history repeat itself. We don't have decades of long-term research yet about the public health effects of RF radiation from cell towers and cell phones, but we know that cancer takes a long time to grow. I know I was very alarmed when I read, short of reading Dr. Kahn's statement, I remember reading in the paper when Lloyd's of London, the venerable Lloyd's of London, dropped coverage for health claims against telecom companies. Follow the money. Please don't make my daughter Elizabeth an unwitting guinea pig. Her slender body is vulnerable to enough known hazards. She and her friends, Caroline, Maybelle, Isaac, Max, Audrey, and their teachers and staff are already worried about school shootings, grades, and climate change. Please do not add an unknown, open-ended risk factor to her daily life. It's hard enough to keep her off her cell phone. To think that she and others are working and growing amidst the daily, unremitting operations of a burgeoning technology is a concern that I ask you to take responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, could we get the folks from the... yes, BSSM, thank you. So it's speaking just for myself, it seems to me like the real focus here is about what alternatives were considered or why this is the best, if not the only site. So I'd suggest maybe you want to start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin Blanchett.
Yeah, introduce yourself.
Justin Blanchett, NBNC, for the record. I recognize some of the speakers from our community meeting, the second community meeting we had for this site, where we discussed a list of alternatives, at least a dozen, maybe more, pretty exhaustively. We had a lengthy community meeting, and then several members of the team, including Captain Lipp and myself, spoke one-on-one with additional other residents afterwards. All three of the alternatives that were shown in the presentation were discussed at that meeting. With regard to Sligo Creek, we have no interested landlord. It's not a structurally feasible tower, and the type of tower it is not technically acceptable. And topographically, that area is actually worse because it's downhill from where we are. We looked at that site several times, whether we could go on the existing tower, whether we could replace the existing tower, whether there was a possibility to build another tower on that site. The answer to all of those is no, and we discussed that at the community meeting. With regard to the Cloverleaf, we approached the State Highway Association about locating in the Cloverleaf, and they said that it would interfere with the Beltway expansion project. This was discussed not only at the meeting, but one-on-one with the presenter who just spoke after the meeting. And then with response to the world building, we were in the process of vetting that site out when we had the second community meeting. We decided to pursue multiple avenues in parallel here. So I will admit that we hadn't conclusively ruled out that site when we attended the community meeting, but since then we have determined that the roof of that structure is not structurally appropriate to put our equipment shelter on, and it would not be feasible from an engineering standpoint to place on that tower, on that building. Like I said, in addition to that, we covered about a dozen other alternatives. We've looked really, really exhaustively for 3 or 4 years at this site, and nobody on this team wants to build a tower that we don't have to build. So we wouldn't be here if we hadn't exhausted every other possible avenue.
How many towers do you have in any other school? Like, we're saying that you're going to add a third one in Blair. Is this happening in other schools, or is Blair the first and only? Can you clarify that?
I can't speak to every school in the county. I believe there are 2 in the immediate vicinity of Wheaton, for example.
two antennas, two towers in the same school in Wheaton? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and at least one of those towers is actually on the property directly next to the school.
Yeah, that's not good.
We have our own tower there. Well, it's not our tower, but we lease space. But I think I don't want to speak for you, but I think it's important to distinguish between the towers that you're talking about building, which are not, they may have commercial tenants, right, or maybe not, but there's other antenna towers that are not the same category of structure we're talking about here.
That's correct. And to clarify, the county executive's office has said that they are not interested in having commercial carriers on this tower. We really can't speak to the other commercial carriers who are in the area, but for us, this tower is for our use and not a commercial tower.
But there are other towers that are in this category that do have commercial users, like the one we just looked at last week. The old tower had commercial users, and the new tower is going to have commercial users. But I'm talking about the other towers that have nothing to do with your project.
That's correct. The
Including-
AT&T stub tower on the fire station and the ATC tower across the Beltway, we have nothing to do with them and couldn't use them if we tried.
Right, but I'm just trying to make the point that there's other towers on school sites as well as on park sites.
Precisely.
And as well as, obviously, in the right-of-way, because some of the antennas are on telephone poles, which are located in sidewalks, for example.
Precisely.
So would you clarify then the answer to the Vice Chair's question regarding, and I know the difference between public safety and the other telecommunications towers. So how many schools in Montgomery County, high schools, elementary schools, or middle schools, have PSSM towers on site or near?
None.
Okay, so this would be a first, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Correct.
This is, yes, on the fire department property, this is the only one that's closest to the school as a monopole.
Okay, that was the other question I had. So when we think about the cloverleaf, this is a monopole, and would you be, that's what I just heard, is that, that's still a true
Right.
statement? So if it's a monopole, the cloverleaf wouldn't be able to support it, or what was the issue with SHA?
SHA told us that a tower in the precise area that was discussed by the presenter would interfere with the Beltway expansion project, and they would not consider it. That's what they said. We asked them several times, both verbally and in writing, and they said no every time.
Okay. Vice Chair, were you done with your questions? Did you have other questions? So my other question, again, monopole, and you guys, so entertain this. If it was the Sligo Creek course, and it's a monopole, would you have to increase the height of the monopole, or would it stay the same? I heard you mention topography, and I've seen the golf course. It is suspect to flooding and some other things, but if you did consider that space, what would you need to do to support a monopole there?
Do you want to speak?
Jerry, project manager. We would, one, have to go with a taller structure. Taller structure will not support monopole. Then you'd have to go into a lattice work structure.
Okay.
And this is why we're trying to keep this at the minimum so we can make it as a monopole less intrusive.
Okay, so I'm not challenging you on this, but I want to hear it. I want others to hear what you're saying. So what would that lattice structure look like if it were on that site? Because at this point, we're talking about a different payload and a different structure. So back of envelope, I'm not holding you to this. What would that lattice structure look like? Would it be 300 feet, 400 feet? Just a guess.
I'm trying to remember the height on that. Perhaps you recall that, Don, roughly? It was somewhere, I know it was well over 200 feet. I mean, it had to because you have a lower elevation.
Exactly.
Honestly, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I wasn't thinking about it because we kind of said that was not an alternative because we also can't get on the property with a shelter.
Okay.
Because of the lack of land available.
Okay, all right. The other alternatives that were presented, and this is more of a sanity check for me. There's some, sorry, I was about to say RSA. There's some restricted airspace concerns with some of these properties that were listed. Is that true, or am I completely off? One was the World Building on Georgia Avenue, putting a tower that would be sufficient to address what's needed. And then there was another one, the Enclave Building. I think we're still in restricted space.
If I might, first off, the Enclave building has been an existing structure, and there's no tower on that thing. We're actually built on the roof on that location. That's one we noticed in our diagram of the location. That's White Oak, formerly Berkshire Tower, now Enclave, and I call it White Oak. And we're already, that's an existing site that's been on the existing, and there's no tower built on there. We can't support bigger structures on there.
With regard to the world building, because that structure is already over 200 feet, that incurs a much higher level of scrutiny from the FAA.
That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Anybody? Go ahead, after you.
Just to follow up with Commissioner Patterson's question, what's the altitude difference between the firehouse site and the golf course? Do you know the difference between the two?
I do not know off the top. I'm sorry. I do not know off the top of my head. I can get those numbers for you, but I don't have it available at this moment.
Okay. I was just curious because I mean, when you take the Beltway, you kind of drive by Blair High School, and then, boom, the golf course is right there. I mean, I know there's a great difference, and you mentioned something about one of the reasons why you didn't consider it. Was it because of the ownership of the property? You kind of mentioned that.
So the existing tower there, the tower itself is not controlled by the property owner, but the ground is. So one way or another, in order to use either the existing tower or to build a new tower on that property, we would need the landlord's permission. Essentially, we would need a lease with the landlord.
Oh, excuse me, which site is that? You're talking about the golf course?
Sligo Creek, yeah.
When you say the landlord,
That's us.
Well, it's not really us, it's the Revenue Authority.
Yeah.
it's what?
It's the Revenue Authority.
Well, I thought they were just managing it, but I still think it's park property.
It is our property, but we do not control it. It's the Revenue Authority is in control of that.
Can you talk to them?
Can you? I wasn't involved in that. Can you
I was
comment?
on that conversation, I'm sorry. I think Judy or Mike were.
Sligo Creek, yeah.
You want to come up join us, please?
I'm Judy Miller, I'm the site project manager. What my memory is that at the beginning of this project, we did look at Sligo Creek as a possibility, and it was rejected because there literally was not enough land around it, as Jerry just said, to build an equipment shelter. And also, I believe the tower was full. There was no room on the tower. So, and also, I believe it's an AM tower, which means that there's electricity running on it. So there were a lot. What happens with these sites is we put them in a matrix. We put the pros, the cons, the pros and the cons, and there were too many cons to pursue it. We don't pursue every site to the absolute end of, analysis.
Yeah, and so to clarify what Judy says about available land, right? Either to place our shelter or to build a new tower would take a significant amount of parcelage that isn't available, not already being used by the golf course.
And if I could just add, we did find our alternatives matrix, which
Could you
includes
just tell us who you are?
Dallas Lip,
Thank you.
Montgomery County Fire Rescue, with the project team. That it was going to be a 240-foot lattice tower if we went to that location. But as mentioned by others, the fundamental issue there too, in addition to all the other problems, is that AM and FM are like oil and water. The two don't mix, and you don't want them close together because it drives up costs and for everybody involved. Assuming that all the other problems magically disappeared, that's still a huge negative to us, because we looked at that. I don't know if you recall, one of the alternative sites for Fire Station 30 was adjacent to an AM tower on a golf course. Sounds familiar, right? And that had huge complications associated with it, and that's why we ended up with the Fire Station 30 site as opposed to that alternative. Very similar situation.
Thank you.
You finished? I got a couple of questions. The previous presentation we had, we were looking at a very rural area. The concern was, would the tower fall on somebody's house, et cetera. But this is to be just a pole tower, and the only operation on the tower to be related to county communications for police and fire, and there's no intent to lease to any private entities on this? Is that
Got
correct?
multiple questions in there. Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, it's going to be a 190-foot tower, not anything above that.
Right.
The leasing of anything else on there first is controlled by the lease that we have with Silver Spring Volunteer Fire Department, who owns the property, that we cannot put anything commercial on there.
Okay.
Because they also control the land, so they have the control of that too. And that was the 3 points.
That's the monopole.
It was multiple in that with it.
Okay. And so the other question is a technical question. In terms of frequency of what you're broadcasting on this tower for police and fire, is that different from a commercial frequency broadcast? And again, this question of impact on children, sleeping firemen, if you will, from a neurological standpoint, is there a difference in the radio frequency?
So, yeah, I can speak to that. Montgomery County operates their network under an exclusive license from the FCC. Other carriers, whether they be commercial or other entities, are not allowed to transmit on our frequencies, and we're not allowed to transmit on theirs. The FCC, as a condition of that license, sets limits in their exclusive regulatory authority over the health effects of RF emissions that are considered to be within a wide margin of safety. Now, we've run an exposure analysis on all of our new towers, and not one of them came back more than 1.5% of that limit, even in the worst case scenario in which every first responder in Montgomery County was using their radio at the exact same time. Worst case scenario, in the apocalypse, 1.5% of the FCC's conservative safety limits.
So you are committed to provide no other private operator or public operator with a different frequency that could cause would not meet this less than 1%. So to speak.
That's not within the control of PSSM. But both the fire station and the county executive have told us that they do not intend to allow any
Okay,
commercial
so
operators on the tower.
that's a commitment from the fire department. Do you have a night quarters there do fire officers stay through the night at that site?
So that facility is staffed 24/7, has been for decades. As far as, I can't speak for the Silver Spring Volunteer Fire Department. I work for Montgomery County, but the Silver Spring Volunteer Fire Department has expressed no interest to us in having commercial carriers on the site because they would have to give up more parking lot to do that.
Yes, I understand that aspect.
And they don't want to give up any more parking lot.
Well, I understand that, but I'm talking about radio frequency and possible impact.
So
Are they aware of that?
I did hear that mentioned several times, and I can state unequivocally that IAFF, International Association of Firefighters, Local 1664, my union, the Montgomery County Firefighters Union, absolutely supports this project and the location of this site, in addition to the location of the site at Fire Station 30. We have no qualms or reservations about implementing this site.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'd have a couple other comments. One talks about the interchange. My background is transportation. And purposely, the ramps were not put in this quadrant because the feeling that you've got the full access ramps over there at 29. So what we're talking about, if we're talking about beltway widening, we're talking about one lane is 12 feet, 2 lanes would be 24 feet. There's no ramp going in at this site. In terms of my I've done interchange design. So I don't see a ramp going in, but there would be available property to move it a little closer, or what? They said no?
I'll tell you what I told the presenter the night of the community meeting, which is that nothing would make me happier than to locate a public safety tower on state property. That is always our first look. We approached them. They refused us repeatedly and in writing.
Yeah, I would disagree that it could, because no ramps are going in there. It's a 12-foot, 24-foot, there's objection to that. But that certainly would be a possibility. Again, looking at your map on page 9, I realize that you show this coverage. If you can go to that, 9, figure. We're going to bring it up on the screen. Okay. If you kind of look at that, the one on the left shows without the tower what the reception is. With the tower, it shows what the reception would be. looks like you need a tower up in White Oak there, or unless those are all stream valleys. But you get some coverage up Route 29. There's a place where the dam and the creek is. That doesn't seem to be covered. But to the south, you've got areas that aren't, that's really Sligo Creek and the Parkway. It's depressed, so you don't get coverage there.
None of those areas are no coverage, or almost none of those areas are no coverage,
Why do they show up white then?
because they're less than the confidence that we designed the
Okay.
coverage for. So there's multiple factors that go into doing a coverage analysis for a system like this. One of the things that we dictate to the vendor, in this case Motorola, is what type of structures do we need coverage for in a given area of the county. So inside the Beltway, and particularly in the downtown Silver Spring, Bethesda areas, we dictated a very high level of coverage is required because of the type of construction that's in that area. So we're requiring them to provide coverage in a 24 dB loss, which means that between the outside of the building and the inside of the building, if we lose less than that amount of signal, we have to have coverage. If it exceeds that, then the building has exceeded the coverage criteria. You can very clearly see, if you look at the maps, what the impact of that is on our coverage maps. Because if you notice, if you follow the DC line, the coverage magically gets perfect as soon as you cross the DC line. The reason for that is there's no coverage loss applied outside Montgomery County. It's just showing the propagation with no accounting for the predominant type of construction in there. So what those white areas that you're seeing in there are saying is that there's less than a 95% confidence that inside a 24 dB building that my radio is going to work 95% of the time. So my radio might work 94% of the time inside a 24 dB building, or 99% of the time inside a 23 dB building inside those white areas. So it's a complete misunderstanding of the coverage maps to believe that white means no coverage. It is possible that white means no coverage, but in the vast majority of cases there is some coverage there. It's just less confidence, or it does not meet the penetration loss for the area that we have required. And like I say, the very stark demarc along the DC line shows you how good the coverage is, because that's the type of coverage you would get if you had no accounting for buildings.
I appreciate very thorough explanation. The other thing, though, just on that, if you look at that same map, the area over there to the west, just east of Connecticut Avenue there, that looks like, so that area would be covered by this tower or not? Another tower?
So all the towers contribute to the coverage. My radio right here, I can maybe hit one tower, or I might be hitting 3 or 4 towers. Me as a user, I don't care. As long as I can see at least one tower, my radio works. Sometimes I hit multiple towers. Sometimes multiple towers hit my radio. It all just works.
All right. We apparently, the State Highway Administration, the Maryland Transportation Authority was okay with a tower at the ICC and Georgia Avenue. There is a community opposition to a maintenance sand and gravel, or salt over there off of the Parkway there and Connecticut Avenue. Have you approached the state on putting something at that site?
That site's actually part of our 22-site plan. We are intending to co-locate our equipment on that tower in addition to all the rest of the towers that we have. To clarify for anyone who's not familiar, that tower is being proposed and constructed by State Highway, not by us.
But you'll inquire, so they are putting a tower there.
They are planning to put a tower there.
They're going to come into us later, but no, they don't have to do that.
That's a question for the state of Maryland, unfortunately.
But you are
we are
tied
intending
into
to
that
use that
system.
tower, yes.
Okay, that's pretty much all my questions. And the issue that you've determined that the 199, this 170-foot tower was rejected. That was a totally different system. That was a commercial tower, but now you need to go to 199.
I heard somebody testify about a 170-foot Sprint tower that was withdrawn during the application process. That had nothing to do with us and predates our project.
Okay, all right. Thank you. A very thorough explanation. I appreciate that.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'd look for a motion one way or the other on this.
I'll initiate the motion on this.
Need to move on the forest conservation plan first.
First on the forest conservation plan.
On the forest conservation plan.
Is that a motion to?
Motion to approve,
the forest
yes.
conservation plan?
I didn't.
Resolution.
Is there much forest on this site? I wasn't sure about that. Is there?
What?
No, there's no forest on the site, and it's going over existing asphalt. There will be no impacts to trees or forest.
But you still have a forest conservation plan.
We need to show the LOD on the plan for construction to meet the law.
Okay, a motion to approve that.
You can do it.
I really do. It should be on the state property on the Beltway. We're not gonna allow them to widen the Beltway. So that's not an excuse. What's your timeline? When do you need this approved by?
We need it built and on air this year.
No.
We need this built and on air this year.
So what happens if we push for the site on the Beltway?
The state highway will say no.
And then
there
what
will be no
happens?
site, and the system will fail.
And you've
And I say that, if I
And
may,
if it's like an extension, let's say we put it there, and then if they widen the Beltway, can they move it in, put it back again? Which they're not, it's not going to happen, as Jerry said.
I didn't say that.
Well,
I didn't say that.
if I may, I say this.
area.
I say this as a father of a son and daughter under 4. This system will not go on air as planned if we are pushed to the state highway, because they will say no.
Yeah.
They have said no at every turn.
And there's no way we can push them
There
at
was,
all.
there was a
Nothing.
Flanagan plan, which was add 1, take 2, but that would be only 12 feet. The other ones originally proposed is 24. But how close are you to the state property?
Is it?
Would you have any idea? 10 feet?
It's pretty close. We're all the way at the southern end of the property. So some of the presented materials show us at the north of the property. That's
With the
not
yellow
accurate.
one?
We're all the way at the south of the property.
So if I said you could, if I was a state highway MDOT, I'd say you could do it, and you went on the state property, you're moving it maybe 10 feet, 20 feet from where you have it now?
Yeah, 30 to 50. There's a tree buffer in between that we would have to get around, but 30 to 50 feet. But again,
It's possible.
At the cost of a year.
it's not
Oh, I
possible
know,
because
I
we
know.
can't use the state's land without their permission.
And we don't have a year.
They're the state. We can't make them do anything.
Well, as far as conservation, seems to be more of the state property. So you get there's no forest affected, but moving this would put it in between forests, so maybe we don't want to do that. All right, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry,
would-
Commissioner
All right, I'm
Seachy,
looking
to
at-
interject. So I know you're about to make a motion, but I'm going to pose a friendly amendment. And I understand, and you guys typically know I support your projects. This one is giving me a little bit of heartburn, though. And it's not that I'm opposed to the tower, and I think you're all aware of that. What I'm opposed to, or I'm not opposed to it, I'm having a little bit of heartburn regarding the location. And I heard that there was a conversation with MCRA. I know Mr. Miller. I don't know what the outcome of that conversation was, but I know that there's been parallel conversations regarding the golf course and no longer existing in the future. I'm not going to throw any shade on golf because I have golf clubs in my garage at home. But I'm wondering what would take, and you're shaking your head no, and I consider you a trusted advisor, so that concerns me. But I'm curious because I've heard we had a conversation, but I don't remember when. Have you had a conversation recently? Because I thought this property was one of those that was being considered to be disposed of.
So even if that was true, let's say magically today, all the problems that we've previously identified with the golf course site evaporated. In a perfect world, it costs us a year. We don't have a year. I'm sweating minutes on this.
I get it.
We do not have a year. If we have to go another year on this, the odds of our current radio system holding together are very slim. We've had catastrophic failures repeatedly, starting last Mother's Day. At one point, we were all but off the air for 11 hours. It was luckily a low activity time on the radio system. We did not have any significant events. If we had had major events, it would possibly have not have been a good outcome either for the citizens we're trying to serve or the first responders trying to serve them, or both. And that's what I lose sleep over each night, literally.
And this is why I generally support your projects. And I've been very clear about that, and I've gotten fan mail from the public regarding my position, and I'm okay with that. I would rather life be saved any day. This one just, as far as the options, ma'am, I see your hand. Unfortunately, we're at the point where we're not taking comments from the community. And Chair, if I've stepped on your toes. That's not my intention, but I want you to know we saw you. I don't know what to say. I'm just on, I'm not comfortable with this one, and I
Well,
hear.
there's been a motion made, so the question is there a second to the motion?
I'm not going to second. Someone else can.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, that is approved. Are you voting yes, or are you abstaining? What are you doing?
I'm going to abstain on this one.
I'm going to abstain as well.
Okay,
And the second part is there a second to this?
then you got the mandatory referral comments.
How's that addressed, please?
Well, you would make a motion to approve the mandatory referral comments and transmit them.
Make a motion to approve the mandatory referral comments.
That's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
I have another
Opposed?
extension.
Abstaining.
Abstention.
Okay, thank you all.